Hey guys, just finishing the day. Just wanted to get back at some more things that I have gone through since the beginning of this, trying to find out what happened to Rodney. And we're going to start from the beginning. And I'm just going to go down a list of things that I have went through with Burlington City Police Department upon looking for Rodney. The first thing was the phone call Sunday morning because Rodney was missing since Friday. And I gave him time to come home because he's done that before. So when I called the police department on that Sunday morning and gave a description of Rodney and a description of his bike, the officer who answered the call did not seem to know who he was or even, in fact, anything to do with his bike or a bike accident. I feel like I could be wrong, but when I'm off for a few days at work, what happens is we talk about what happened over the weekend or over the couple of days that we didn't see each other, my coworkers and I, and including my bosses. So a little bit curious as to why the officer didn't know what happened over the weekend, especially being there was a John Doe sent to the hospital. But it was anyway. So that was at about 9:30 in the morning. I called on Sunday, and I continued to call around to family and friends and got nothing from them, and waited for the officer to call me back because he was supposed to check on something. Well, he never called me back. So I had to go down to the police department to file a missing persons report on Rodney. And that's when the officers, the one I spoke to on the phone and the one who was at the call, the 911 phone call for Rodney on Friday the 1st. I was told that Rodney was at the hospital and that the only thing that Rodney had, his belongings, was his e-bike, which they had there at the police department. So another thing I had a question about was why maybe, in fact, when you clock in and you are given a report over what happened over the weekend or the night before, as far as a police department, I would assume anybody that calls in looking for a John Doe or a Mr. with an e-bike, please contact us immediately so we can get the family together with the person that's in the hospital, because the officer did know he was in the hospital. Well, that didn't happen either. So when I went down to the police department to file the missing persons report, the two officers came out and immediately told me that Rodney was in Cooper Trauma Center in Camden. And they had his e-bike, and that was his only belongings. And at first, not taking in the complete fact that Rodney was in the hospital, I asked the officer, well, why didn't anybody try to find out who Rodney was? Because you told me he didn't have any ID on me. Why didn't anybody try to find out who he was? You're telling me he's in a hospital and there are medical decisions being made on his behalf because myself and his family was not notified that he was brought to a hospital. Well, the officer's answer at that point was, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. First time ever dealing with police departments in my life, and I've dealt with few, and multiple times has ever a police officer had been defensive in any sort of a way with me. This, to me, was being defensive, and it could have been from a John Doe question, why he was left as a John Doe, I'm not sure, but nobody was specifically blaming that officer. I asked why didn't the department do anything about fingerprinting him, and the officer who arrived at Rodney's call, the one that was there the day I filed the missing persons report, was the one who said it multiple times. So I get to the hospital, I find Rodney, the officer who was on the phone drove me to the hospital, dropped me off there. I guess he knew that I wasn't going to leave with him, whatever the case was. So that's Sunday, the September the 3rd. September the 5th, I go down to the police department because when I looked at Rodney, when I found him on September the 3rd, Rodney had no other injuries. He had the worst of them all, but no other injuries. He had a brain injury, skull fracture, a lot of frontal lobe damage in his brain, and the skull fracture was so bad they had to replace his own bone with a synthetic one. So September 5th, I went down to the police department to ask if they could investigate further what happened to him, because I did not believe what I was told, that he fell off of his e-bike. I was very, very, very suspicious of the fact of that, because Rodney had no injury even to his hands, no scrapes anywhere, nothing to his body, only to his head. And I find that very very unlikely, because there's nothing protecting your body as you're falling off of a moving bike. And it was an e-bike, so it was moving faster than your leg speed. So there should have been some other injury somewhere else aside from his head. So I questioned that, and I went down to the police department to file or have them open up an investigation to what happened to Rodney. September the 6th at about 4 o'clock, I get a phone call from the officer that said he would have a detective assigned to this call me up and tell me, not the detective himself, called me up and tell me that they were not going to investigate, that they were completely okay with the opinion. It wasn't investigated. They were satisfied with what they have found. Again, I'm having a hard time with this. So when he said that to me, I felt like it was unjust to Rodney. I felt like that more should be done, because, even though Rodney had alcohol on him, and even though he may have had illegal narcotics on him, he still is a human being, and he still deserves the right to a fair investigation. And that did not happen. I have the body camera footage, so we'll get into that. I filed immediately upon this. I filed OPA requests for body camera footage and dash camera footage regarding all the officers and all of the dash cam footage of all of the officers that arrived to Rodney. Because when I was told he was placed, or he was found on a grass patch, I was also told that he bounced from one side of the concrete to the grass, and that's what caused that injury. Well, I have the body camera footage, and I will be releasing that as soon as I reach the height of my story and why I am doing this. So on September, I believe it was the 7th or 8th, in between hospital visits, in between, dealing with doctors, I go down to the police department to file this OPA request for these two footages. And I did that with any help, because I was suspicious to the fact of an officer telling me something that was not his fault, when I asked, why didn't anybody try to figure out who Rodney was? Why was he left as a John Doe? Very suspicious to that still to this day. We live in a different world, a different tech world. If needed, and they needed to fingerprint Rodney for some sort of criminal activity, I highly feel that would have been the case. They would have brought him down to the police department. Something would have been done. Very easy. And due to Rodney's background, he would have lit up like fireworks in the computer, he would have came up right away, and they would have known who he was. So very disappointing on